welcome everyone to Adobe's Think Tank. The topic of today's discussion is on IoT and how it's affecting brand and customer experience. We're going to have a different kind of format today for this event. We're going to have a debate between two teams about the impact that IoT is having on these experiences, not specifically about the Internet of Things itself. My name is David Cooperstein. I'm going to be moderating this debate, and I will introduce the panelists in a second. But what we did for this debate is arrive at a resolution over the course of a 2-hour conversation this morning about the Internet of Things and where its real impact was being felt in the marketplace. That resolution, which I'll read to you in a moment, is going to frame the debate, and we're going to have two people take a pro side to the argument and two people take a con side to the argument. So what we resolved, again, after talking with a number of very esteemed Internet of Things thought leaders, was that by 2020, 15% of consumer purchases in the US will occur passively, meaning that they will happen as a result of people transacting in the background, their dishwasher buying things for them or what have you. And existing brands, the Tides of the world, will figure out how to create great brand and customer experiences. So just to repeat that, by 2020, 15% of consumer purchases in the US will be passive. And existing brands will figure out how to create great brand and customer experiences in that new environment. Now, to take both sides of that argument, we have a great panel here today. We have Brian Katz from VMware and Alex Morehouse from Banner Health, who are going to take the pro side, saying that brands will figure out how to deal with an environment where consumers are transacting in the background. And taking the con side, the negative side of that argument, is going to be Susan Miller from AnyPresence and Colin Rainey from Formlabs. To start off, again, I set the resolution. What we're going to do is have a very formal debate-style session here. Each participant is going to have 2 minutes to frame their part of the argument, and we're going to, at the end of 2 minutes, we're going to go to the opposite side. And I'll moderate between the two to make sure that we get all arguments heard. There will be a cross-examination, and then the audience will be able to, the audience of the rest of the people that are in the room here will be able to vote on the results. So I am going to start with Alex, correct?
Yes.
So Alex, given the resolution that we've, and I will be setting the timer here. I can show it to you if you need to. But given the argument that we have here, you're giving the argument in the affirmative. You have 2 minutes to state the opening argument.
Thank you, David. It was a really good conversation, and we are very comfortable saying that 15% of consumer purchases of brands are going to happen passively by 2020, simply based on behaviors that we're seeing already. Jeff was helping to remind us that most of us are very brand loyal, and we don't like having to make active changes because we've got other things going on. We have kids and jobs and lives. And if you start with that as a basic hardwiring of consumer behavior, and then you take a look at what's happening already with Subscribe and Save at Amazon, the kinds of subscriptions that you can get from Costco, having things delivered to your house. It's already happening with Safeway and grocery stores. And those things are very easy for a consumer to be confident in. And there's two different categories of those kinds of automatic subscription refills. One is really depletion, so you run out of paper towels and a case of them shows up at your house. Others are what we were calling attrition, and you say the tires on your car have worn down or your running shoes have gotten worn out, and you get a notification and another set of shoes shows up. These are behaviors that make life easier instead of harder for consumers. So it's very, very much in line with how we're behaving anyway. We want those things to happen. We do think that of that 15%, most are going to be commodity purchases because we're just more comfortable with having paper towels or laundry detergent from a brand, again, going back to brands, from a brand that we already know and trust. We've already made that decision, so we're very likely to hand that over to a brand to let them fulfill on it for us. So we're actually really comfortable that it's happening now, and it's going to continue to happen, and it's going to be something that we'll be seeing more and more of with commodity products, particularly in household goods and in durables.
Great, perfectly timed. Susan, for the negative, you want to make your argument?
Sure. So whereas on our team, we may agree that there would be 15% of purchases happening passively, what we disagree is that it will be the large brands who are the ones who are the enablers. So our point of view on our team is representing we believe that the platforms will be the winners in this scenario, not necessarily the brands themselves. And so there's a couple reasons for that. One is that the platforms are already designed digitally. So they have a different approach, a different business model that the large brands don't have. That's not the traditional way that they have engaged with their consumers. They already have a number of the transactions happening through their platforms. So when you think about where the passive transactions are happening, it's on the players that we know, these large folks who are in the market, who in many cases are already aggregators. So the consumer's relationship isn't with the individual brand. It could potentially grow, although they have brand loyalty to some of the products you mentioned, they may grow to have more of that loyalty from Amazon or Google or wherever they're actually purchasing the items from. Further, they do less focus on the mass market advertising. It's a different relationship with the customers or with the consumers than the traditional brands. And because they're digital businesses, they have much more flexibility to be able to iterate and evolve as the IoT ecosystem and passive purchases are evolving. Last but not least, as they are understanding the consumer not just in one brand, but rather the aggregators are able to look across multiple different brands, multiple different types of products that they might be purchasing, and think more about that transaction and enabling that lifestyle change or the consumer experience versus one brand, one off, one product. In some of the research we found, only 20% of businesses today are currently defining themselves as digital. And so when you think about...
Time's up. Okay, Brian, you're going to give the... Sorry. You're going to give the rebuttal to the argument?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Susan. It's great that we at least agree that 15% will be passive. So that's a start. I think it's interesting that you're bringing up platforms, and I actually think the platforms enable the brands. And what we're seeing is partnerships with people like Tide and Amazon. Amazon came out with a dash button. They didn't come out with their own Amazon laundry detergent. They partnered with Tide for that. They partnered with Bounty. They've partnered with the people who, although they're aggregators and they can give them information, they're partnering with brands that people are loyal to and that where they make their profit from. And so what you're going to see is that their play is going to be the digital arm for these companies. So the large companies that aren't there yet, that's the play for Amazon, Google, Facebook, the like, when you're talking platforms, to actually become that digital arm for them. And while they don't have to produce the goods, they don't necessarily have to warehouse them, although they may, they become the transactor for that and actually enables them to actually do more passive and give people, because as we said, Alex and I were talking about commodities and durables, and when you start looking at that, do they want to get in there? Do they want to actually put that money aside when they can turn it over for brands and the like? And then you have to ask, for brands, who's the customer? And the customer is the actual user. For people like Amazon and Google and all, you're looking at the customers, how do we get ads? How do we actually have sell-through? And where they make their money is actually a very different model from what you're looking at when you're looking at the brands who are actually building the products, doing the research. And as people are more used to being with these brands, they're going to want to stick with them as they go online.
Great. Okay, and for the negative rebuttal?
So I think when you talk about sort of different purchasing pattern, you're talking about a different experience. And one of the things I think you really have to consider is the structure with which these companies operate today. They are built to move massive amounts of products through physical retail channels. They're built to produce demand through advertising. And this different experience of purchasing is going to it's going to require a completely different capability of how to operate. So, there are some just Herculean efforts of these kind of things will have to start small and grow, and I think that becomes very hard inside a big brand. I also think you need to think about the difference of how Netflix usurped Blockbuster They designed a completely different experience. It was more of a service. They had to work completely differently, and even though Blockbuster tried to mimic it, it faltered. And I also think you want to think about how much your argument is based that we will start to order commodities more fluidly. And I think one of the bigger problems is that as it becomes a commodity, it's not a brand. And I think you need to think about store brands and how in traditional retail, big brands have seeded many, many millions to own store brands because they lost touch, because the channel was the intermediary. Amazon is the intermediary. These platforms are becoming more powerful, and it's not hard to think about Amazon selling detergent, and all of a sudden you don't care about Tide, and there's nothing to suggest that it wouldn't happen.
Great. Nicely done. Okay, so now we're going to go into the cross-examination phase. So each one of you is going to have a chance to ask the other side a series of questions based on the argument that they made, and we're going to start, Alex, again with you. And you can ask Susan and Colin anything you would like about their argument.
So Colin, talk to me about the emotional relationship in brands, because as somebody who's usually trying to get somebody to connect to my brand, I make that emotional connection through online and offline media, and I don't really care where it is they're purchasing from me. So I'm still in control of that emotional connection with the brand, and I don't care the platform that it comes through. Why would that not hold true in the scenario that we're talking about? So my brand is building an emotional connection with you. When it's time for you to sign up for your health care, I don't really care if you go to a broker, if you go to your own doctor, if you go to the exchange. How is that connection going to happen directly with brands?
And I can respond?
Yeah.
I think your question actually points out the opportunity for traditional brands, because now that we have more connections and different types of experiences, the playing field in the ecosystem has actually become a lot larger. So I could have a brand in my mind, I could have Jif peanut butter in my mind, but actually the experience of eating the sandwich on a picnic and all these other things are what matter. Right? It is the fuller experience than the product. I think as a brand has to go through retail, they have to buy advertising, they're forced to think about the transaction rather than the experience. And there's a long line of research by Pine and Gilmore that talk about experience economies, and they talk about how we as consumers graduate from commodities, which you're referencing, to products, to services, to experiences, and experiences like Starbucks are things we will pay the most for. So the more that digitally we can create platforms that people can use these experiences, the more powerful they become.
Oh, and you're saying brands have been disintermediated from those experiences because they're behind it. Okay, thank you.
Great. On the first negative, Susan, cross-examination.
Okay. So if the data shows that only 35% of businesses have a truly digital business strategy, or have invested in digital in some way to have a part of their business strategy, and so many brands miss the mark with that transition from bricks and mortar to web, or from web to mobile. What gives you confidence that brands would be able to make that migration from mobile to IoT?
I think what you're going to see, and what you are seeing, is that what you call the disintermediators, like Amazon, Google, and the like, are stepping in to help these brands do it. The ones that are having trouble, that's an opportunity for these platforms to actually step in and help them. And you're actually seeing that in mobile. So you're seeing aggregators come in and help these brands build their loyalty, build their online, whether it's their online shopping, whether it's their web app, their mobile app. And we're starting to see some of that, and we've actually, I should say that a lot of the people here have worked with companies that are doing that, including yourself, Susan. Mm-hmm. And where it becomes interesting is that as you start looking at that loyalty, how's that loyalty transfer into that experience? And I think, Colin said it kind of interestingly, that I think that experience is still there, and I think that's where the advertising is, of how do they turn that brand into an experience across those aggregators becomes the interesting question.
Great. Any other questions?
Brian's much more eloquent, but I would just say, because we're lazy, all of us are lazy. My tires wear down and a new pair shows up. How great is that? If you can provide that experience, which is what you're just talking about, oh, I'm lazy, I'll do that.
Great.
But do you think that,
Yeah, go ahead. You have a couple seconds left.
Do you think that the brand is capable of enabling that new experience? I agree that consumers are lazy, but
Can they get there?
can the brand actually make that happen?
They already are. Tide dash button, Bounty dash button. They didn't go to Amazon and create it. Amazon went to them and said, we can enable this for you.
Okay.
And you know, that's an example of them actually helping to do that already.
All right, Brian, your turn to cross-examine.
Okay, you know, it was interesting. You talked about loyalty and experience, Colin, and as brands start building that experience and start, you know, you take for example, if you ever taken a store brand peanut butter, and they've gotten much better, but think 10, 15, you know, when I was growing up, I won't say how long ago, when I was growing up, you buy the store brand, it was all oily when you opened it and all these other things. It only takes one bad experience to move you off. Good experiences tend to be, I'm used to it, it's my brand. If you move to a store brand, you know, you said store brand, but an aggregator brand, I'm wondering how that plays into it. And my other question would be, who do you think is going to make these store brands for these aggregators? Do you think they're going to go to a no-name, or they're going to actually go to Tide and say, Tide, can you make us Tide for Amazon that we can resell for our own?
Do you know how big ConAgra is? So I think the best way I know to answer your question is to compare two experiences, right? So let's take a brand that's even a service brand, so like Walgreens. Walgreens is a drugstore. If you get sick or you have drugs, you have to buy them all the time. They have some expectations of how you will operate. They expect that you will show up and give them your prescription or call it in. They expect that you will come get the pills. They expect that when you go through the store, you will buy junk food and all these other things, right? So there's a startup in Cambridge. It's called PillPack. And what they've done is they will take your prescription, they will dose all your drugs, put them in individual packets, and send it to you in a roll. The point of the difference in the story is they've thought about how to be more fluid. To your point about consumers being lazy, how can they remove barriers? How can they completely redesign the business and the business model to attack an entire experience through all the data and the technology that's made available through phones and IoT and all this other stuff? I think there is such a rewiring and an opportunity for big brands to do, and I think if they could get there, it would be amazing. I just don't believe that there's not enough inertia in place to allow them to do it.
Okay, Colin, you have your chance to cross-examine.
I get to go, and now I have another question.
I'll take your time if you don't want it.
You know, I think I was really interested in your point about people being lazy, and you do what being lazy is. As we have more affordances through technology, as we have more information, as we can assume or anticipate what consumers want, you would actually argue that the technology could allow us to be lazier than the current form, right? Mm-hmm. But what I don't understand is I don't see brands designing into this moment. And I don't see it by 15% in the next 5 years. And I'd like for you to talk to me about where the ways that you think that's actually possible in the time frame without
Wow.
redesigning a whole new business.
And it's a whole new business because
I
it's
think
a
it's a lever
supply
for
chain
disruption.
issue.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
if I'm Tide and I'm building a relationship directly with you, I'm also eroding my relationships with all the retailers and with Walmart and with Amazon. So I have an interest in keeping all of my peeps happy. So you got to keep a lot of people happy there.
You see my point.
So I do see your point. I do think that there's probably a different kind of relationship that you would build, given that you have multiple distribution channels. What can you do to build that emotional attachment directly to my brand? And how do I mindfully choose who my supply distributors are so that they give that experience? So it is actually a very challenging question because somebody else is delivering the experience for you. We do have the buttons, but I think it's more likely, simply because of the economics of the situation, that experience is going to be delivered through trusted third parties. So it goes both ways, and I think your side was arguing that it's going to be, rather than the big brands, it's going to be these smaller niche products that don't have the mass distribution or platforms such as Amazon that will be making those relationships. We don't know because each of us chooses every day how it is we want these products supplied to us.
I think what's interesting is taking what Colin said before, you know, looking at PillPack in Cambridge. I don't think PillPack's going to be PillPack in 3 years. I think PillPack's either going to be bought up by Walgreens, CVS, or Medco, which is one of the mail order things. And I think that part of what you see is a lot of these very small brands will get bought by larger brands to take advantage of that technology and that expertise to help build that experience and give that other, you know, what Alex is saying here, that other model of great. If you're going this way, we'll give it to you this way. If you'd like it that way, we'll give it to you that way.
But do you think 4 years is enough time to get to a 15% transaction rate? Collecting that longitudinal data and figuring out what are all the...
I think that in 4 years, we'll certainly be at 15% passive. Whether or not the brands can get there, and I think we're saying that they will.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to go to, I'm going to ask a couple of questions as the moderator. We're going to open up to questions from the audience, and then we'll have closing arguments. Okay? So my question to you, first to the, as a counter to the pro side is, we talked about the issue of can the brand do this stuff, do they have the data skills and the data access to be able to deliver a customized experience to compete against the platforms, would be the first question.
So I would say people who are in the services business have a huge advantage because they have call, click, or visit. They have transactional data coming in from the call centers every day, tens of thousands. They have clickstream data, hundreds of millions coming in, and then they have their retail sites as well. Whatever retail is, it could be your brokerage firm or it could be an actual big box. Those who have the 3 channels have data coming in every day, and there's good enough data. So it's all dumpster diving. It's pretty ragged out there. Well, I'm coming from the medical arena, so I say my chief job is I'm the data proctologist because I'm going to very dark places to get my data. But there's enough, and it only needs to be good enough. Again, because it's pretty basic, if you're doing this, then I'm going to offer you that experience. Enough for us as consumers to say, oh, you actually listen to me. You're actually giving me my things my way. It is much harder if you are tied, if you're selling shoes, if you're selling a durable goods that is a one-off. It's much harder because you typically have third parties who have your data. They are robustly disinclined to give you back your own data. So if you're trying to get your data out of Walmart or if you're trying to get your data out of Costco, good luck with that. So anybody who has first-party data and first-party transaction data has a really good shot at it. And if you take a look at those categories, financial services, healthcare, anything that it's a repeat purchase, property and casualty, any of those have call, click, or visit data, and they have longitudinal and long streams of data, and they can get you pretty darn good experience served up to you the way you want it. It is much harder if it's the one-off. So I think it's going to depend on the industry you're in.
And for the con side, manufacturers are starting to develop e-commerce sites specifically for the reason of getting the data that Alex just talked about. So how do the platforms react to a company like Mondelez or Kraft that actually have a lot of consumer data?
So the question is, how is a platform reacting
So
to
do you think
the
that a platform
CPG
is actually
company?
going to have to defend themselves against this if they want to own the passive experience?
I think you have to think about like what is sort of undesigned territory. So if I'm Mondelez and I'm getting more data about making like the more perfect cracker, are we just optimizing, at like the 6th and 7th sigma versus changing the full experience where the platform is more, it's better positioned to sort of attack. So I think, when you just look at how much the phones and Amazon and Apple alone have changed the way we consume or open up platforms or venues for new types of consumption, there's far more to do there than sort of a more perfect cracker.
So what I want to do is take 2 or 3 questions from the audience here for either side of the panelists, and then they'll have a chance to do closing arguments.
Coming back to I'm actually going to direct this that way to Brian and Alex. Coming back to the original question, which is all around this passive payment economy, or 15% of our transactions will be held that way. We've seen with Apple, with Amazon, how hard it is to get that consumer to give the credit card in the first place, and they have to expect some sort of a relationship, and it's not just a single brand relationship. So what sort of experience do you think a brand has to give over the next 5 years, because that's the time frame that we're talking in about, to justify me as a consumer saying, here Tide, here Procter & Gamble or whomever, I want you to ding me on a regular basis without me thinking about it for the experience of your detergent showing up at the door. What do you think the level of experience is to justify me giving you my credit card for that?
I think it's a great question. I actually think it's a two-part question. I think part of the experience is partnering with the Apples, the Amazons, the Googles, et cetera, because you need that smartphone or that brain that's somewhere. But I think that, connecting this back to IoT, which is where we started, is if you're Tide, do you put a sensor in the bottle or the powder or whatever else that says they're using it at X rate, it's going down, I'm down to 10%, let me send them the alert that, do you want us to order this? And as consumers start to see over the next few years, whether it's empty cookies, empty milk, whatever else, that it's consistent and it works on the way you want, you're going to see them start to trust those brands more, and it will still have to work with those partnerships. But I think that's where that brand experience actually comes in, because they can afford to put those sensors and play with those sensors and really give that good UX, that good user experience. Because in the end, that's what it comes down to of, it won't solve, and you and I talked about this before, it won't solve the fact that if you're getting your groceries delivered and you decide that you're going to make a cake spontaneously, you may not have the ingredients, you may still have to go to the store. But if you can go to the store 5 times a year instead of 50 times a year, and those other 45 times you're getting stuff passively delivered, that's a user experience that people want their time back. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Alex.
Just what I would probably answer is the default has to be good for me instead of good for you, the brand. So the default has to be, I get enough milk, but I'm not getting 5 gallons of milk a day because you've defaulted to something that you think is what I need and it's good for you. So that baseline experience has got to be simple, it's got to be good for me, make my life easier, and then I have to opt into the more elaborate experiences that might have upside for you. So psychologically, I think if it's good for me, then I'm going to trust you that you're actually trying to provide a service for me and the experience is in my best interest.
Great. Other questions?
I've got one to
Yeah.
go over to the other side. Just on the thesis that the big, large brands don't have what it takes to be able to move this fast and be able to sell this way, there's a few things to sort of keep in mind. One, they're very deep-pocketed, so they can fund that R&D. Two, there are lots of sort of enabling sort of middleware services, some of which some of us in this room work for, that actually enable big brands to be able to get into these games much faster than they used to. Third, they're usually publicly traded. So money plus the very strong push to grow usually drives some type of innovation. They are big brands and successful brands simply because they have learned to survive and thrive through decades of different sort of marketplace changes. Coke does freestyle. Dollar Shave Club starts to take a bite out of razors, and now Gillette has a similarly priced subscription service. They can catch up and then outmarket them 10 to 1. So when you look at that, how do you sort of account for the fact that there's a lot of sort of chips on the side of sort of the large brands to be able to move really, really quick and be able to both stay in the game and thrive?
So, one of the things that we talked about was just the infrastructure and the setup that they have. So if you think of the way a traditional CPG company is structured, that there are many different products and many different divisions and different brand manager for each individual one of those. And so as you imagine, for an entire company to pivot and each of those individual brand managers to rethink what is that consumer experience. A passive purchase, touching a button in my mind, not a passive purchase. The passive purchase is the sensor that knows that I'm low on detergent and automatically sends it back. So I think each of those individual brand managers at all of these companies we're talking about, think about the inertia and the dollars certainly required, but also just the creativity to have voice of the customer data, understand what the not existing customer experience is today of how I purchase and what I'm doing and what my workflow or what the process map looks like, but what should it be? What's the ideal? Not just an iterative improvement, but saying like, what should it be? I just feel like in 5 years, that is going to take a lot of time and effort and thinking through for each individual brand within one of these large companies. What, how do they change the nature of that customer experience and that engagement?
I think your point about the integrators, and even back to the point of buying the small startups, probably the best shot they have. And it's not because they don't have money or they don't hire some of the best and smartest people.
Or because we work at startups.
But I also think it's hard, like the far future is easy. That's why IoT is so complicated, because the far future is easy. It's the near future that is so confusing, because you can't tell the difference between a fad and like what it will actually be the future. So if you're in a big business, this is classic disruption theory, right? You're in a big business, you're like, we sell a ton of cookies through this channel and we know how to advertise it, and we're not gonna kill that golden goose, and let's go figure out how. I mean, the Dollar Shave Club and Gillette is a very, very promising example. But how big does that have to be before Gillette says, no, actually, this is what the future is, and I actually start to decommission this business in a way, or modify it in a way that doesn't steal? Because right now, their mail order business is stealing from their retail business, which is one of the most optimized things. I'm very sure the service business costs a lot more to operate. So I think even in the switch between the two, and sort of the evolution is where you see people falter. I mean, like we talked about Blockbuster earlier, but perfect example, right? They had huge amounts invested in retail and headcount and all this sort of stuff. So I think they do have the resources, and you just have to have a lot of vision and commitment. You got to sort of commit when it's the right thing. It's tough.
Yeah, but the example you bring up of Blockbuster, if you follow that through to Netflix, Netflix was a DVD rental service.
Absolutely.
You did 3, and you can remember, I guess it was 3-4 years ago, they said, nope, we're getting rid of it. We're doing just streaming. And they spun off the business. They spun it back in about a day later.
Yeah.
Because,
Major screw up.
but if you look today,
It's all original content.
they've actually, they started changing the pricing, making it cost a little bit more, pushing the consumers more and more. People had cell phones, Wi-Fi, everything else. Nobody talks about about Netflix's DVD business. And, you look at some, neither of my kids know that Netflix had a DVD business.
This is the problem from switching from atoms to bits, right? Because when you work with atoms, you focus on what the logistics is to move that thing around. And the digital services are where it happens the fastest. But I think this is the hardest part for these brands, is like how can they hold the tension between the atoms and the bits in their mind? Because the bits, the things that'll come off IoT and all these other things, that will be the future of the richer experience of their atoms.
So that goes back to what Susan was talking about, though. So if we go back to the large brands, so let's take Procter & Gamble. It's a great example. So they've got over 100 brands. All of them send flat files to their central customer database. They're scanning by SKU, so they have all of that. They have all of the savings clubs from Safeway and Walgreens. They have all the individual data. They know to an eyelash, by gender, by ethnicity, by age, by income, by geography, where you're purchasing what. They can algorithmically, this is again the power of longitudinal data, they can tell you exactly, this is the experience that Susan wants. They can serve it to you tomorrow.
But Dollar Shave Club has still carved out a large part, I mean, at least a large part of interest from the consumers. I don't actually know their numbers. So, I mean,
Yes.
the data doesn't win the war. The experience wins the war.
Data always wins the war.
The data helps you
Data's
design a
gonna win
better
this war.
experience.
Okay, last question from the audience, if there is one.
Good soundbite.
I guess this goes to a lot about, I think we've kind of like hit on that. The brands are going to probably have to partner with the larger platforms in some sense. And we talked about, you mentioned trust, and like how do we get, where does that trust come in, and what's that threshold? So what part of the customer experience does the brand give up to the platform? And what part does the platform really play in helping advocate for the brand? I guess that's my question to both sides.
Can you repeat it again?
Say it again.
So like, if the brands have to kind of have these partnerships with the platforms to move forward and really hit this threshold by 2020, what part of the customer experience does the brand become comfortable to give up, like the trust factor to the platform, that they have to manage that relationship with the customer? And then what role does the platform pick up in trying to advocate for the brand? And how does that relationship kind of become symbiotic and play on each other?
I think you'll see the platforms figuring out where they're making their money on which brands, and those are the ones where they're going to be proactive to invest in the relationship. right? Because then it's mutually beneficial. Whereas I think you'll end up seeing some brands where they're not doing as well with the platforms, and they're going to have to lobby themselves and try and make it compelling for the platform.
I mean, they're
That's our argument. Thank you, Susan.
No, I mean,
gonna get-
question to both sides.
Yeah.
Now, do I think it will happen in 5 years? No. And do I think it will happen in 5 years and it will be, 20%, 15% passive purchasing? I don't think so. I don't think so done by the brands. I think it will happen if, it would happen, it would be through the platform itself.
Okay.
I think- Go ahead.
Anything else on your side
Yeah, you guys.
on that question?
I would just say I like the way you put that. I do think that there's a delicate balance between the brands and the platform, and as we start moving more towards the platform and they start playing with data, it's the way Amazon's done its AWS cloud business. They're able to see what people are putting on their cloud, and it enables them to go into some of these businesses and actually take them over. But as Colin said, it's much easier to do with bits than it is with actual goods. And I think that is most of these platforms aren't designed to be goods. They're really designed to be a conduit. And how do they take that fee? So Apple and Google are 30% off the top. That's coming down. Amazon does the same thing for a lot of things. And the question becomes, does it ever get to the point that it makes sense for those platforms to really become those good sellers? And I would say, I'm not sure.
So do you think that in this scenario where there is 15% of your passive purchasing coming through, wherever it's coming from, do you think that the brand holds the power in that relationship with the consumer, or do you think it shifts so that the platform is the one holding the relationship?
I think it's probably 50-50.
And over time, does it evolve? And the
I
pendulum
think over
shift?
time it does evolve, and I think that
Too easy.
the partnerships will become very strong with the platforms, and there will be certain winners and certain losers in there that we'll see. Just like, I think the buttons are the first steps to make people comfortable with passive. I don't think the buttons are passive. But I think what enables is they're learning, they're seeing, and people are willing to do it. I don't have to go to the store. It gets drop shipped to me. It arrives the next day from Amazon Prime or whoever else. And, there are also people who are trying to disintermediate Amazon. You have Jet and some other ones, and it's a tough model to get into. And the question is, what can they offer?
Do you have one more question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, on that, I think it's a great question. I think that the brands are in the best position to do it, because ultimately, back to your point on, sort of bits and atoms, you need atoms to create bits, right? And if we're talking about passive purchases, you need sensors to be able to tell you it's time to replenish the thing. And so ultimately, the consumer packaged good is the sensor in and of itself if it's positioned to be exactly that. The best way to find out if you need new tires is for your tires to tell you, not your car. The best way to find out if you need new shoes is for your shoes to tell you that. So they're actually in the first position. It's really a matter of whether they can actually leverage that.
Yep.
If they can do that, they're there first.
I totally agree. And I just think they're going to have to figure out how to leverage it, because otherwise they won't have the data that they normally would, because I think a lot of the larger brands, they're losing the transactional data as you go through the platforms. I mean, this is one of the more contentious things that the platforms have with the brands is, how much data do I get? I mean, as someone who sells on Amazon, I will tell you that I don't know my customer anymore. We do very close customer service, and I can't find them, I can't get to them. Sometimes that makes me think I don't want to be on Amazon as a brand, which lets me know the threat is very real.
Yeah.
All right, so closing arguments. We're going to do closing arguments. We're going to have a little vote on which side did the better job of arguing, and then we'll open it up for other comments until we wrap. Okay, so for the affirmative, who's going to give the closing argument?
I opened, you did.
Oh, boy. Gee, thanks.
You have 2 minutes.
It's interesting. We all seem to agree that we're going to be that we'll be at 15% passive. That doesn't seem to be the argument, and, certainly there are a bunch of things that we get passively in our house, but we do it via brand. We get a certain brand of juice for my daughter for her school lunch every day. We get other brands that way. There's certain paper towels that we use, toilet paper, whatever else. We don't use brand X. And we do get that delivered actually passively. And I think that, the question that came up before is, brands are in the first place there. They're the ones who are going to be putting the sensors in, and it's a question of whether how that platform gets to play with those sensors and whether they become just the shipper and receiver. And in some ways that's better for them because then they don't necessarily need all the warehouses and all. You know, it's a question of, okay, I put the order to you, Tide ships it. You know, they become the intermediate platform, and that's actually a good place to be for them. I don't, as much as I see it, I have a problem seeing with the loyalty that we have and the way people look at experiences, and experiences are built on loyalty. And we still look at commercials, and it's still building you on, this is, you know, your life's gonna be perfect if you use this product or that product, and people buy into it. And people actually go towards the best experiences because they are lazy, as Alex said. If I find an experience I like, that's what I'm gonna keep with. If a platform can help me achieve that better, great. But they have to do more to get me to change. Because, you know, we were listening to data before, and I don't think we brought it up here, that unless you move, it's very difficult to get people to change the brands they use. And when they move, it's a very good time to get them to try new brands and new things. So when you're comfortable in your life, why would you change and actually go to a platform, and you actually have to have the ability to do that?
Great. Closing arguments from the negative?
Okay. So we believe that there's two sides of the argument. The first one is that that the platforms are actually best positioned to enable the passive purchasing and to enable that passive customer experience. And that second, the large brands are not as nimble and not as equipped infrastructurally to be able to take advantage of it. So whereas they do have lots of marketing dollars in their pockets, many of them missed the boat on that transition from bricks and mortar to web, and many from web to mobile. I think there will be some large brands that are winners, but certainly not all. And when you look in aggregate across the consumer relationships that you have with any brands, large or small, it is more likely that the aggregators who are looking across multiple different processes and flows that any consumer would have on an individual day-to-day basis, it's more likely that those aggregators are going to be the ones who win, because they're the ones who are thinking not just about the one point of purchase and one transaction, but they're aggregating your lifestyle and the way that IoT has kind of changed that the dynamic and the process and the flow. And so unless you are the aggregator of that large amount of data, not just for your product, I don't think, or we don't think that you'll be the enabler of this passive commerce. Essentially, because of the platforms being structured to, already digital, having flexibility with their business models, already having the transactions and being an aggregator, that they're better positioned to be the enabler of it versus the large brands.
Great. With 9 seconds to spare.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I think both sides were argued very well. I would like to hear a little bit from the audience as to, I'm going to read the resolution first, then we'll hear from both sides of the audience. So remember, the point of this debate was that by 2020, 15% of consumer purchases in the US will be passive, and a lot of that is enabled by the Internet of Things, and existing brands will figure out how to create great brand and customer experiences in that environment. So the question is, we can do this by show of hands. How many people think that the people arguing for the brands made the better argument, and that that's going to be the way this plays out?
Are we supposed to vote for ourselves?
Yes.
Sure,
vote-
you can vote for yourself.
Alex.
Just voting down party
So
lines.
that's 5. And for the platforms, which is the argument that the cons made,
Nay.
that's
Did
6.
anybody-
Oh, I guess the cons
did,
win.
Did anybody's mind change?
No, we just voted down party lines.
That's a good
voted
question. So that's a
yes.
good way to open up the debate. So did anybody, like Jeff, you actually made a very strong argument for the brands in your last question. Was that something that you felt strongly after hearing the arguments and developing some of the arguments, that you think the brands can sort of take advantage of the data and create experiences?
Yeah, and part of it is just my own purview, where most of my career has been spent working for large but innovative brands like Nike. And I looked at Nike being first to digital fitness, certainly amongst the rest of the footwear and sportswear industry. You've seen this announcement from Under Armour that they're now a data company. They spent $750 million buying startups in the last year to make themselves a data company.
Right.
At that point, Nike already has 60 million people using digital fitness devices and was on the cover of Fast Fast Company as the most innovative company on the planet. So they get all sort of the brand credibility for leading that out and doing it organically versus just buying up a bunch of startups, whether it's Runkeeper or sort of any of those other ones. And so I've seen great brands with really strong leadership be able to do that. I look at brands like Coca-Cola. What they're delivering it's soda. It's been around forever, but they're reinventing ways to do that, whether it's Coca-Cola Freestyle or some of those different things. And so, brands have been, great brands have thrived for decades because they usually do know how to change their own rules. They usually do know how to disrupt themselves. Some die, some don't, but they're certainly in a tremendous position to begin with. They're in a leadership position. And so it's really theirs to lose is the way that I look at it.
Okay.
But
Yep, go ahead.
so the only problem with that argument, and I agree with what you said, it's the constraints of the actual conclusion or resolution that we came up with. That doesn't actually answer the resolution. That is an argument beside the point where what we're talking about is, can these brands deliver those passive transactional experiences? Even the fantastic brands that you talked about, like Coke, Freestyle's not a passive transaction like that. I don't have a Freestyle machine show up on my doorstep every month, thank heaven. My kids would love it. But that's what we're talking about. And what I heard, and I don't think there's any disagreement that brands are critical going forward, that they can do a lot with the bits. I think what we were disagreeing over by design was whether or not the brands or the platform vendors were best positioned to deliver that passive purchase experience. And actually what I heard on both sides was the platforms win on that, like hands down win. But where we were maybe disagreeing, or at least appearing to disagree, was whether brands kind of go away. And actually, I don't think that we weren't arguing. We definitely weren't arguing that. It's just who's going to be able to deliver that experience. So I think what the brands have to figure out is, how do I insert myself into those new channels without becoming consumed by them? And you think about one example just in the physical retail space, moving bits, is Walmart. Who was in charge at Walmart? It's not Tide, it's Walmart. Walmart says, you're going to sell it for this price to me, and you may have to degrade quality, you may have to do all sorts of things, but I win. And that's where we're going in the digital age, and what we need to make sure of from the brand perspective is that that brand experience is strong enough that they don't get diluted. The brand doesn't get diluted by the
I'm glad
channel.
you brought up Walmart, because we're talking about retail or data-driven partners or platforms, but Walmart is a retailer that's actually seen its revenue decline, and they're having trouble being they're a physical platform as opposed to a digital platform.
Right.
But look,
and
take Walmart versus Target.
Yep.
Target is very data driven. We've seen the story in the New York Times about them knowing somebody was pregnant before, the person knew they were pregnant based upon the purchases and being able to offer coupons and everything else. And you've seen Target go after Walmart based upon quality in the stores and all. And it's interesting because I don't think it's the brand's job to deliver the passive experience. And I think that, because I actually agree that
So we win.
I do think that, what I mean by that is I do think that the platform is the delivery mechanism. The brand doesn't, Coca-Cola doesn't deliver you the soda. They're either putting it in the Freestyle machine, or it's going to the store or wherever else, and the store may have sales on 2-liter bottles, whatever else. But it's still, the brand's enabling part of that experience. And you look at what Coke's done with the Freestyle, they're not delivering the Freestyle to you, to your doorstep. But if your kids download the Freestyle app and are going to restaurants or movie theaters with Freestyle and creating their own mixes, what happens when Coke sends an email to them or to you as the parent, because they're too young, and says, your kid loves Coke Cherry Vanilla, or whatever mix they've made. Would you like us to deliver that to you monthly? And do you then say, you know what? They're right, and this makes my kids happy, and this is one less thing I have to think about. Do you care if it comes through Amazon? Because Coke may not want to actually drive to your house every day.
That's a good point.
They may go to the platform. I think there are two different pieces there.
I mean, the platform itself might also enable that. So
Yes.
back to the Tide button, we were talking about, that's not Tide coming to Amazon saying, make us a button. we want to make more sales, so create some kind of device that people can put in their home. That's Amazon seeing the sales and seeing what's going on and saying, this is one of the most commonly ordered things. How can we create a device that someone can put in their home and press a button and get anything delivered? Because it wasn't just a Tide button, it was multiple brands that they did this with. And so the platforms are the ones that are enabling the conversations right now, whereas a lot of brands are just staying back of, how do we get into this? What should we do? How should we do it? And you need the platforms to actually make that delivery, but still need the brands to make the conversation, make the
What's
effort.
interesting about what Amazon did there was Amazon was seeing the purchases every month, but not every month. What they were seeing was if someone was in the grocery store and went by the Tide aisle and knew it, they'd pick it up there, and that was one less order through Amazon. They said, how do I disintermediate that and get them to order it all the time from us? And then let me go sell that to the brand. And the best part was then actually originally they sold the buttons to you. You had to pay $4.95 to get a dash button, which I never understood, because it's like, hang on, I'm enabling you to deliver me something, and I'm enabling you to brand it. Why am I paying for that experience? And I don't think they charge anymore, but that was, you know, the original model when they looked at it was the cool people will pay because they want to be the first. But
But also make sure you care. You'll use it if you pay
If you pay for it,
So
that's
Yeah.
right.
you got,
Skin in
there's
the
a
game.
value filter.
I do think the Walmart metaphor is really important. I think this is probably one of those areas where history won't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think as the platform gains more data, as they gain more share of total wallet, you will see some of the very similar sort of negotiations and sort of like muscling
Absolutely.
people. So it'll be fascinating.
So you have under
There are big teams on both sides that want to make sure that their relationships are
as you get
maintained.
more data and rich amounts of data that can predict these purchases, and as the algorithms get better that help you understand these sorts of things, it's just going to get more and more interesting.
I also think the brands are going to grow bigger, because I think
Oh, I don't. I think we're going to get blown into a massive niches. I think we're holding on to these these iconic brands, but I think as choice comes, you will see more and more fractionated. I think it supports the fractions and it supports the choice.
So does a consumer perceive a brand to be more modern if they have a sensor in their product?
Sure.
Because maybe that's the way
I think it
these brands
depends on-
reinvent
I think it depends
themselves.
on what the brand means to them. I mean, that's kind of a dodge, but I don't think it's hard.
But you also have
What's the
like
sensor doing? Yeah.
same time,
Is it saving you money,
Right,
which
the
would be the
sensor
value
is-
equation?
Is the sensor just in the packaging so it can tell when I've picked it up and where I've placed it back? Is the sensor monitoring when I've opened it, when I've closed it, how much is in the container, or what I'm doing with the container?
Because I would expect the innovation to come to the point about Amazon and Walmart. Walmart could say, well, if you buy the